All right, ladies and gentlemen, for the next 90 minutes, we will have 2 sessions with multiple speakers. For the second session, it will be what's new in AL language, enhancing your development experience. But right now, get your hands together for our first speakers with what's new in AL package, the right app.
Okay, everyone, welcome. As was said, this is going to be a long session. It's going to be 2 sessions. So we're going to talk about the package first, the app package, and the language a little bit later. But first, let me introduce my colleagues here. We have Blanca, we have Balash, we have Peter, and hiding over there somewhere is Espen, who's going to join us a little bit later. So for this first part, we're going to talk about the app package. And for the app package, we want to talk about the things that are maybe not just the AL code, the other things about the app package. This can be source control information, resources, and some instructions for the platform. And then we're going to let Peter talk about troubleshooting, about how to troubleshoot your app package. Yeah, let's go. Blanca, stage is yours.
Sure. All right, so for this first scenario, I'm going to show you how you can leverage some of the latest capabilities, such as source control information and resource files in your app package. So for this case, you can imagine that I have a marketing text generation app using AI. And what I want to do is leverage the new feature for resources so I can move my prompts into resource files. And this will allow me to protect them better and also make my, my extension more robust. So to do that, the first thing that I need is access to my source code. And actually, now I can do it, since 2 releases ago, now I can do that directly from the web client. So I'm going to go ahead and go to extension management page. And I'm gonna look for my extension, which is this one over here. And you can see that I cannot download the source code directly from here because it is protected by the resource policy. But if I open the card details, then I can see that it has some source control details. So I know that this app is on GitHub. So I can see here the repository URL where it's hosted, and I can also see the commit ID that corresponds to the version that is installed currently. And you can, so this is actually quite useful, the commit ID. If for example, you encounter a bug, then it's quite easy to pinpoint from which commit ID this was introduced. And you can add this information on your app manifest, or if you are using ALGO for GitHub, then this information is stamped automatically when you create a release of your app. But it's also recommended that you add this as part of your process if you are using your own release pipelines. And thanks to adding this information in my package, now I can very easily access my source code directly from the client with this new action, open source from Git. So once I click that, as many other opening VS Code functionalities, this will go to VS Code. And since it's the first time, I can either clone or open it. So I will clone it in this case, in this folder. And as you know, you can only do this if you have access to the repo. So if you don't have access, this will throw an error. Yeah, so you can see I already have my repo cloned. And I'm going to create a new branch from main, and I'm going to create changes. And yeah, that's my app, and this is my source code. Another thing that you will notice is that I'm missing some references. So for that, I need to download the symbols. But I don't have a launch configuration for this project. So once again, I'm going to go back to my client, and then help and support. And then I will find this new action over here, generate launch configurations. And when I click on that, that will generate the configurations directly in my project, matching my environment. So I don't have to do that manually, and now I can easily download the symbols. So I did that just with 1 click. And while that is going on, I want to also make a remark. If you look at my code, you can see that I'm using the BC AI resources. So these were mentioned earlier in the keynote. So these are the Microsoft managed resources that you can use to access LLMs. And I'm not going to go into detail with this right now, but if you want to get started also with your own AI project, then you can very easily use a template that we have introduced in VS Code. And you will have a project just like this set up, and you can get started with your own project and test it out. And now that my references have been resolved, then it's time for Balash to continue with the resources part.
Thank you, Blanca. So, continuing in the context of this marketing text copilot capability, let's consider the scenario where we want to move the system prompt out of our AI source code. This could be beneficial for multiple reasons. Maybe we want to access it from other code units as well, or maybe it contains some important and sensitive information, like intellectual property, that we do not want to keep in the source code. Well, Business Central now allows you to package arbitrary files with your AI extension that can be accessed at runtime. These resources can only be accessed by the extension they are packaged with and not by other extensions. So, to move the system prompt into its own resource file, we first have to create a new folder that will contain all of my resources. And then I have to add it to the app.json resource folders property. In our case, I have created the .resources folder with the prompts subfolder and added my system prompt.txt file, which contains the prompt that I wanted to move out. Then I went ahead and added the resource folders property, and I added the .resources folder to that. After this, accessing the resource from AL is super simple, and it can be done by invoking the nevapp.getResourcesText in our case, and then specifying the full file path relative to the resource root folder. If we want to do some further validation, we can also list the resources and check and verify that the system prompt.txt file is actually available. We can use the nevapp.listResources, and then we can pass the prompt's text literal as a filter, and it will provide the full list of the resources that are available in the prompt subfolder. I can check if my prompt/systemprompt.txt file is available in this list, and if it is not, I can manually handle that case in any way I want. So if packaging the system prompt isn't ideal at all, then an alternative could be to move the prompt into your own Azure Key Vault and read it from there. First, you have to specify the key vault to read from by adding the key vault URL to your app.json. Then, reading the secret from the key vault can be done by first initializing the app key vault secret provider, and then invoking the getSecret method of the secret provider and passing the name of the secret that we want to read. To prevent accidentally exposing any sensitive information, we strongly suggest you use a secret text variable type instead of a plain text, so that the system prompt will not be exposed during your debugging sessions. And that's been it from me. Now, back to Blanca to look at the packages from another perspective.
Yes, another important aspect of packing your app is to know how to modularize it in such a way that you can maintain the extensibility, scalability, and maintainability of your apps going forward. But as you know, time goes by and the apps start to mature and they start to grow, and then it's time for you to split those up into smaller parts so you can maintain, keep those principles. Yes, that's actually my case right now, because I have an app that it used to contain just a sales functionality, but now it also contains the inventory functionality. So for this case, I would like to split up my app into two different applications, one for sales and one for inventory functionality. And as part of this process, that means that I also need to move objects from one application to another application. So for example, with the pages, I can do that through the usual obsolescence process. But with tables, it becomes trickier because I need to handle not only the move of the table itself, but also of the data inside the table. And up until now, the only way to do this was through migration. So you would have to write your own upgrade logic to transfer the data from one extension to another extension. But since the last release, or actually since last year, you might have already seen that we introduced a new feature for moving tables and moving fields through some properties that we set in AL that acted as platform instructions for the platform to handle that move. And last year, that was released only for the base app. But since last release, we also made this available for your AppSource apps. So now you can also use it for your regular apps in AppSource. So as I said, this is done through some properties that you set in AL. And then the platform takes these properties and handles the upgrade for you, the transfer for you. So there are usually 3 iterations where how you would do this. So in the first iteration, you want on your source extension, you want to prepare for the move. So that means on your table, you just need to set the obsolete state property to pending move, and you have to specify the app ID where you want to move your table. And then you have to deal with any of the breaking changes that could happen during that stage. The second iteration, it's also on your source application. You just need to allow the move, and do that by setting the obsolete state to moved. And the third step is on your destination table application. You have to reintroduce the table, and then you have to set the property moved from to your source app ID. And it's very important that you have set in step 2 the table to moved, because otherwise the upgrade, the uptake, the move will fail during the upgrade phase. Yes, so skip that too fast. So that was it for the theory. Now let's look at how that's done in practice. So in my VS Code, I can actually set up my AppSource scopes, so I can kind of stage how I'm gonna do this before actually doing to AppSource. So I did this right now, and I have my sales application. You can see I have my inventory module and my sales module. And I want to move all these objects to my new application. So as I mentioned earlier, I need to, in my first iteration, I just need to enable these properties over here. And you can see I already get some errors over here about the table that is missing. So I also want to move these objects, so I'm also going to mark those as obsolete pending. And now I can increase the version of my application. And I could go ahead and publish that. So that would be my first stage. For my second stage, I have to go ahead and mark this as moved. And you can already see that all the references to the table are no longer valid. But since I'm moving these ones, then I can go ahead and delete these objects that I'm going to move to my new app. And that's it. And now I can go ahead and increase the version and publish that one. And then for my third step, I just need to update the move. So for that, I already have my new app over here, inventory. And you can see I have reintroduced the table. It's very important that the table is exactly the same as the old one. You cannot remove any fields. You cannot remove any methods, public methods, although you can add fields and you can add methods. And then the only difference is that I have to set the move from property to the old application. And you can see I also reintroduced the page and the permission set objects. And that would be my third iteration. As you can see, I'm also missing some references over here. So I also need to deal with that, but I will go back into a bit later. But that was, as you can see, that was a very, very simple way of doing it. Yes. So for moving fields, it's also a very similar process. Let's take this case for where I want to move a field from the sales table, and I want to move it to its own table extension, another extension. And I could do that using the same process, basically. So again, I can go to my sales table over here, and I have to set my properties. Oops. I'm zooming out by mistake. There we go. It's different keyboard. Okay, yeah. So I need to set up my properties. Then that's the first iteration, second iteration. And then on my new extension, I just need to reintroduce the field. So I actually have already done that here, so I can show you. And that's my field table extension with my new field with a move from property. So again, a very similar process. And then let's go back to the case that I showed you before that I had to deal with. And it's more of a complex process because, as you can see, both applications depend on the code unit and an enum object. So when I moved the objects from one extension to another extension, then that broke the dependency. So to handle that, then I need to move my objects, in this case the code unit and the enum, to an app of itself, and then I can make that app a dependency of my two other applications. And that should solve my problems. And then if you want to be an even better developer, you can also make use of interfaces, and that will make your whole extension more maintainable in the future. So you can have an interface and then have code units implementing a different functionality of that interface. And that was it for moving tables and fields. This was just a case scenario. So make sure to check the documentation and the launch event video if you want the full information with other cases and other considerations. And just before that, as a bonus case, I want to show you that, as you can see, if we had an application that depended on my sales app, that's only one dependency. But now I have potentially 4 dependencies. And instead of manually having to go to my app.json file and update all the dependencies, then I can easily go once again to my environment. I can go to extension management page. Then I can select my dependencies, my extensions. And now I can find this new action over here, get selected as dependencies, and then I can show and copy. And that will format my extensions as dependencies without having to manually fill in the information. And I can copy paste that and put it in my app.json, or I can also go ahead and download those directly in VS Code. So this will update my app.json with my dependencies, and it will also download the symbols as it is doing right now. So that was it for this scenario. And now Peter will show you more about the troubleshooting.
Thank you. Let's give Balash and Blanca a hand. Yeah, so I think Steffen oversold it maybe a little bit because he said troubleshooting, and we have lots of troubleshooting tools in the product. Actually, you can go to aka.ms/BC Troubleshooting. We have a whole landing page on the troubleshooting tools. I'm going to talk about performance. And when you make an app, right, imagine that you deployed it and the customer calls and say they have bad performance. You got these small lights, right? You have hands as well. So how many of you are, solving performance issues as part of your everyday work? Yeah, not that many maybe, but that's good to hear. So what we have for helping you with performance issues is, of course, telemetry. You can use telemetry to get insights into what actually happened and try to mine that and find patterns. But we also have some more interactive tools in that you can actually profile code. So how many are aware of the profiling support that we have? Yeah, not a lot. So about 5 years ago, we introduced the ability to, from within Visual Studio Code, create these snapshots, basically offline debugging from production environments. How many in the audience have tried using the snapshots feature from Visual Studio Code? Oh, that's great. That's actually a lot. And so one of the features that you could do when you created that snapshot was that you could include a performance profile that could actually give you insight into the calls and the time spent within the methods and within sort of the branch. And that's the view I have behind me here. You can see, basically follow along, see the execution, and you can actually jump into the source code as well if you have that available in VS Code. We have hyperlinks that lets you go in there. And so that's something we had in Visual Studio Code. And then in 2022, I think it was, we introduced the in-client performance profiler, which was or is a way for you to interactively investigate performance issues within the web client. Basically, you can run through the scenario and get the same kind of information. How many of you have tried the in-client performance profiler? Still a lot. So that is something that is useful for developers, which I guess most of you are, but also for functional consultants, for support, for example, trying to investigate and pinpoint where in source could there be a bottleneck when the customer is talking about a performance issue. And so the way it works is that you can open that from help and support, or you can search for the performance profiler, and it will basically open up a window that you should place on the side where you can start and stop the profiling. You then start the profiling, you perform the user scenario, you stop the profiling. That's why we call it interactive. You basically do the scenario while you are recording. And then after the profile has been captured, you can get an overview of where time is spent. So which extensions spent the time. So that's a good indicator of should you blame Microsoft, should you blame an AppSource app, should you blame a pretended extension for a specific customer, for example. You can actually also enable some further details, so you can see the call stack, and you can see which objects took part of the flow and where is the time spent. So that's basically the scenario for this. Now, some of the challenges with the in-client performance profiler is that it's exactly interactive. So that means that somebody needs to do the repro steps. So if the customer is calling, they need to help through maybe they can't use this tool themselves, so somebody in support might need to help them go through ping pong, and that can take time and impacts the time to mitigate because it's inefficient. Also, if you have any kind of performance issues that are transient, that doesn't always happen under certain circumstances, right? The customer is complaining about performance, but you don't see any performance issues. That can be a challenge as well. And then the in-client performance profiler only supports interactive flow, so the user clicking in the UI. So those are some of the challenges. They don't support web service calls, for example. They don't support background sessions like job queues. So about half a year ago, we introduced schedule profiles. How many heard about the schedule profiles? Yeah, so that's not a lot. So schedule profiles is basically a way where you can capture these performance profiles more in an automatic, non-interactive way in the background. So you define a set of rules for when the profile should kick in, and then the platform will handle triggering the profiling. And that reduces the manual collaboration with the customer. It also reduces the time to mitigate. And another nice thing is that it does not only support the interactive flows with the user, but also web services and background tasks, right? So if you have a performance issues in a web service, you could actually go in and monitor that via a scheduled profile. And so again, you can go to help and support or search for now analyze performance with the schedule profile, or you can search for profiler schedules. And that basically opens up a list view where you can define the rules for when to trigger a profile. And of course, we're going to do new. And when you then create a new profile, you need to add some capabilities or some rules to that. The first one in the general section is that you can, of course, decide whether you want to activate this or not. You can still have it linker there. Maybe you reuse some profiles and you want to check after you fixed it or something like that and rerun this profile. But normally you would have it enabled during the investigation. And you can then set the time window in which you want to profile, in which is active. You can also set some filtering criteria. So you can say that you're only interested in profiling a certain user or a certain activity type, like clicking in the UI or a web service call. And then you have some advanced settings where if you worked with the profiler in VS Code or you work with the in-client profiler, you might know the difference between instrumentation and sampling. So basically instrumentation is that we monitor everything happening, even the smallest things. That's available when you profile from the Visual Studio Code. So if that's your need, you need to use the Visual Studio Code snapshots. The interactive performance profiler and this schedule profiles, they use sampling. So basically at any given interval, fixed interval, every 50 milliseconds or something like that, it will look what is happening now, what is happening now, what is happening now, and then it would summarize that afterwards. So that means that you won't necessarily be able to see everything that goes on, right? Because if something happens at 40 milliseconds and take 2 milliseconds, it's not gonna show up. But it will show the longer transactions or the longer AL code execution. But you can influence that, and you can actually also influence filtering out of the real small ones, small durations, if you just want to focus on the big things. So now we have a rule in the list, and it's active. And time passes. I don't know how many recognizes it. I always see this SpongeBob, 1 moment later, but I'm super old, so I played Maniac Mansion, that you remember the days of the tentacle, maybe? And this you jumped in time, basically, and later that day, it's set in that game. And so later that day, somebody goes in and looks at what was captured for that profile. So back in the rule, and you open up the capture profiles, and then you can actually see what happened. What did the user do? They clicked around in the UI, and it took some time. And you can see that, right? And if you find something interesting, each of these entries are basically a whole profile, right? So you find something where, it looks like opening customer list is normally fast, but in certain circumstances, it's super slow. This is a slow case. I can then open that profile specifically. And you can open that either in the sort of normal in-client profiler tool that I showed before. Again, you can see which extension is taking the most time. You can also open it in Visual Studio Code if you want, as we saw in the beginning. And so that way you can drill down and figure out where is time being spent again. But the nice thing here is you don't have to talk to the customer, and you can mine some of these transient issues, and you can cover web services and background sessions. Now, right now, we don't have a way to go from this view into source code. Maybe you want to investigate source code, right? We probably will add that sometime. Blanca showed these open in VS Code from the client. This is an obvious place to just have a hyperlink. You click on the place in the call stack and it will go to VS Code, and if you have source access, it will show you that. But another thing you can do, which is actually new in VS Code for this season, is that you can search in symbols. So within Visual Studio Code, you can use Control-T, and then you can search for, say, a customer page or the vendor list or something like that and find that. And you might ask, what's great about that? Well, of course, you can. That's nice that you can search. But you can actually use it also for context for GitHub Copilot. How many are using GitHub Copilot in Visual Studio Code? Yeah. So one of the nice things with Visual Studio Code now is that with GitHub Copilot, you actually have agent support in there that can help you refactor code, etc. And you can provide context. So you can actually link with Control-T. You can link in objects like take this customer table and create me a customer page from this and instruct AI to do that with these fields or something like that. So it's a way to bring in context, which was hard before. So it's a super nice feature both for finding and for AI or Copilot use. And again, the access here depends on the IP protection, just like Blanca talked about with Open VS Code before. We'll talk about that in a moment. But first, I want to say for all of you It is a common pattern with performance issues in customer cases. We don't see as much adoption of these tools as we would like when we get performance issues into our support organization. So please use the normal profiling during development and troubleshooting. Use also the new schedule profiler to find the issues. As I said, we have ak.ms/BC Troubleshooting. If there's one thing you should remember from right now, that's the link, because it contains 20 tools that you can use across your daily work on troubleshooting, whether it's debugging, snapshots, these tools, or others. So I mentioned AppSource and IP protection. How many of you have heard the term IP protection policy? Not a lot. Okay. So we're basically mainly talking about AppSource apps. And as a publisher, you normally want to protect your IP so that others are not stealing your effort. And so let's talk a little bit through that sort of concepts. So we have, normal applications, an extension here. It could be an AppSource app or PTE or a dev. It's not really a PTE, right, in the IP protection, but just in general, we have an app. And you can deploy that to the cloud, one of the Microsoft Cloud instances. That could be a production or it could be a sandbox. You could, of course, also take that app and deploy on-premise or to containers or local installations if you are a developer, right? From these two environments, sometimes you need to use what we call symbols. I guess you're all familiar with symbols. It's basically a reduced representation of the app that you can use to code against. The symbols can either come just with the metadata, or they can actually also contain source code. And so I alluded in here that for the normal app, we have AppSource, but it's obfuscated, but it does contain AppSource, and it contains resources that we heard Balash talk about in raw format. The symbols, they either contain the obfuscated source or no source, and then also either resources or no resources if it's metadata only. And then we have something called the runtime packages, which are sort of like a pre-compiled thing where you can, what it helps you is that you can deploy something on an NST without compiling it on the NST. It's a little bit like the FOB files for those of you that know the old days. And that contains, again, the obfuscated AL code. It does have source code and the resources, and it also contains C#, which is generated, right, for that specific version of the NST that it was generated on, which is supposed to match the same version of the NST that you deployed on. That's the whole idea. Now comes the important part. Well, there's actually one more step. You can, of course, also hand these out. Maybe you don't deploy them yourself. You just give somebody an app file. You can give the symbols. You can give the runtime packages. Maybe as part of a partner calling to get some CI/CD pipeline support for them to test your functionality, you can give them something. But the important part is that when it comes to protecting that IP, the only place that we can protect that is actually in cloud. When it comes to local installations, we cannot do anything from Microsoft on that. Yes, the source code is obfuscated, but that could be broken. Furthermore, once it's installed, it's on the NST in SQL tables on SAS. You can't access that, but if you're on a container or on-premise or something like that, you actually do have access to the metal, right? So there are ways to get to that. We can only help make it harder, but we cannot guarantee it. And that goes also for handing it out manually. And so let's talk a little bit about what you can do in SAS to protect this. We have a property in the app.json of the file itself that we call resource exposure policy. And in that one, you can control whether anyone, whether the app can be used in debugging, whether it's possible to download source, or whether the source is included in the symbol files when you pull down symbols from the environment from, for instance, Visual Studio Code. Normally, we have set the defaults for these are false to not expose anything, but actually the ALGO project template in Visual Studio Code will typically have these enabled because then it's a little harder to start out with them having been completely locked down. Then another feature that we have is that ISVs can actually, what if you lock it down, but you actually need to collaborate with partners, or you need yourself to have access to be able to troubleshoot on an environment, and you locked everything down. What can you do then? Well, then we have something that we call sort of dynamically granting access. How many have heard of this dynamically granting access? Very, very few. How many here are actually involved in making AppSource apps? Because maybe I'm talking to an audience which is not doing a lot of, not a lot actually. Maybe that can explain a little bit, but regardless. You can dynamically do this. So we heard about the key vault that you could set up. We saw before how you can set it up. If you have a key vault for your app, you can put in a secret called BC Resource Exposure Policy overrides in that app. And then you can actually specify or grant partner access, specific partners access to be able to debug or download or get the code from symbols. Typically, partners don't want to grant downloading source because it's a bulk download. It's easy to get IP. It's a little harder to in debug, but in theory, you could brute force fetch during debug as well. But it is still something where partners are in control, or publishers are in control on this. And then you can take that grant away after a period of time as well. This is something that is not supported on snapshots and profiling. It's only debug on normal sandboxes. And then very recently, we applied this to dev extensions as well. So if you have an AppSource app and you want to deploy that to an environment, you locked it down, but you have your own environments where you want to troubleshoot something, you can actually allow access to that in the environment. Because normally dev extensions are made so that you can download source code, because you're supposed to debug and work with it. So if you just dump a dev extension on a customer's box, in theory, they could get access to the source code. And so you can apply the resource protection policy to dev extensions as well. And just like with the dynamic granting, you can do the exact same thing for dev extensions. So you can grant yourself. That's typically the normal scenario. You lock it down and you grant yourself. But you could also grant, customer or partners you work with, their environments as well. When we talk about dev, it's more the tenant that you grant access. When we talk normal resource policy, it's more the user that you grant access. And in the user case, it needs to be a delegated admin. So just to summarize, the recommendation for AppSource apps is that you lock it down. I know that can create problems with partners not being able to debug. So it is a balance. But for those that you then know, you could grant them access temporary or forever, basically. And you use the key vault to override that. And then really only share app files externally with someone you trust. When it comes to PTEs, I'm urging you to, from a sort of IP point of view, make sure that we see more and more cases about disputes about who owns the IP. A customer might not know, they want to move partner, etc. I understand parts of the lock-in effect on that, but please make sure that it's very clear from the beginning who owns the IP if the customer is leaving for PTE cases. And ensure that you have source control also for PTEs, preferably shared with the customer. Yeah, so we just covered a fraction of what is changed in the language. We have a ton of information on the launch event videos. How many are watching launch event videos? Not a lot. Really a lot of content that you can watch when you sit in the bus or on the train or somewhere else. So I highly recommend that. We talked about the troubleshooting links, GitHub Copilot, and the launch events for the 2 videos. We have 7 minutes for Q&A, I think.
Awesome.
And we have T-shirts.
We have T-shirts.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Peter. That was very nice. So, we have T-shirts. Anyone want to ask a question? Oh, lots of people. I'm going to go very far for the first one. Just so you don't have to sit on the first row to get a question. Here we go. Let's see. Catch. And then you get this one afterwards.
You showed us that we can move fields between pages or extensions, not between pages, between extensions. Is this also possible to merge table extensions into one extension? Because we have the problem that someone decided to create another extension with we basically have to move with us, and we want to move it into the main extension. Is there a way to do this now, or is it still not supported?
Yeah. Blanca, do you want to answer that one? There's an extra mic there if you have. Meanwhile, you can get this one.
Does it work?
I don't know.
Hello?
Yeah.
Okay, it works. Yeah, so you cannot, I lost what's the question.
Right.
Yeah. So you can move a field from the base table to the table extension and from a table extension to another table extension, but not from the table extension to the base table, because that's not supported for this feature in the moment. So for your answer, I guess that's a no. You could move all the fields to the same table extension, but then you will have the table and a table extension.
Yeah, thank you. Anybody else? We have one here at the front row.
Was that merging?
So you get a reward for sitting at the front row. Here you go.
Yeah, I have a question regarding this new app file properties where you can also link to your repository, what we saw on GitHub.
Yep.
Is there only GitHub supported or any GitHub based repository?
Yes, so the property itself is just a string, right? So that you can put whatever you like in that property. Same goes with the commit ID. You can put whatever you like there. However, for the open in VS Code, maybe you want to take that one?
Yeah.
The value of the GitHub repo property?
It's because I lost the question.
Okay, sorry. Yeah. So the question was whether the property for source control is only for GitHub or there are other...
So it's actually for any Git repo, so it doesn't have to be GitHub, it can be GitLab or Azure DevOps, so that works with any Git repository.
Yeah. Good. Somebody want to ask a question without getting a t-shirt? There we go. Let's go over here. Who was it over here? There we go. Yeah, I'll get to you next. There we go.
Concerning the data and the splitting of the tables into the new app, when and how takes the data update, the data movement of the existing tables place in the system where you update your app?
Yes.
Is this done by some job queue, or is it just by changing the name of the table in the background? How is this done?
Good question.
Yeah, it's a sync engine. But
Exactly. So it's doing an upgrade. So when you upgrade to so in the last step, when you have the destination table, that app takes the new table, and it's actually the same table. It's the same name, same ID. It has to be the same, but it's taken from the new application. When that application is upgraded to that version or installed, if it's the first time, that's when it takes place, that movement of data.
Yeah. So in the sync as part of the deployment. And excuse me if you said so, Blanca, but we also sometimes hear about or get questions about performance of this move. And the majority of the scenarios are actually renames or very fast operations on the SQL, so not moving data.
Yeah.
For the field, I think there's something equivalent of the data, what's it called?
Data transfer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But normally, I mean, if you move a table from one extension to another, it's instant, basically, because it's just renaming down in the SQL database, not moving any data.
Cool. Last one here.
I actually have a fairly non-standard question about the language server protocol implementation for AL. Yeah, so I have a side project trying to bring AL to other editors. And I noticed that the debugger adapter protocol and the LSP as well is a sort of non-standard implementation. Any plans on making it more standard in the future?
Short answer is not right now. It's not in our scope as it looks right now. But if you have ideas, reach out and we'll have a talk about it. Absolutely. There might be some improvements we can do there. Okay, so you have about 60 seconds to run out before I'll start over with the next session.
But
So-
please stay. I mean,
Yeah, exactly. Please stay.
yes.
Let's go on to the next one then.